Donald requested that this function begin with an old-fashioned CWA morning tea.
I guess a formal hello to everyone would be the first thing to say.
Rob? Perhaps it's project.
Project North!
Yes!
Give it a break, it's been a while.
I knew I'd get notes as soon as... Anyway, I'll do my best to reach the plebs in the back rows. And thanks for being here for this very special, melancholy, but joyful event. I know, personally, I'd actually much rather be somewhere else than here, saying a kind of formal, somewhat final farewell to our great friend, as the programme says, Incomparable Don Batchelor. But so be it. Firstly, a welcome on behalf of Don's brother, Ron Watson, Ron's wife, Jenny, as well as Robbie Nason and John O'Toole. The four of them have been the prime movers in getting today's show on the road. But the event itself, surprise, surprise, is from Don's own hand. What would you expect? The choice of works, the thematics, the dramatic arc, the venue are his. The players, cast by Don. I do have to apologise, though, that in the role of MC, you've got the understudy. The role was to be taken by John Watson. But as you all know, John was recently called away too suddenly. The offer of a gig he couldn't refuse, sadly. Anyway, Don designated me as the stand-in, and we all thought that he would be more than pleased to have John acknowledged in that way. This, for me, is one of many opportunities Don provided over the years since casting me in a small role in his first big production, The Merchant of Venice, early in 1969. It's been a while. Anyway, I'm very honoured to step in alongside the other cast members, as I have been to work with Don and to know him for a long time as a friend. But by now, I've probably improvised away from Don's text about as much as I can do without getting a very big note later on from somewhere. So, on with the show. Don's great friend, Judith Bell, will set the scene. Judith.
He was my great friend, so I should not be surprised that he set us all what we had to do. He knew otherwise we'd run amok. And he says this, I'm channeling Don. Nobody knows better than Judith my propensity for failing to turn up on occasions where my attendance might, all things considered, have been preferred. This time at least, I have a reasonable excuse, and I anticipate ready forgiveness from all here expectantly assembled. Sorry I couldn't put in an appearance, but conveying through Judith my appreciation that you all made the effort. Please don't let my physical absence detract from the general goodwill. I'm here in spirit. On the other hand, too giddy a mood ought to be avoided. So I have asked Rod to deliver a short elegy on my behalf.
Donald did his honours dissertation at UQ on the love poems of John Donne, Dean of the old St Paul's Cathedral in London that Shakespeare would see across the Thames. In 1624, when he was recovering from a serious illness, Donne wrote, "No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor of thy friends or thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Donald's reflection on this is that our death is not our end. For good and for ill, our words and deeds live on through others. We do not die entirely. Something of us persists in this great flow of life, which is where God is. And now, a contribution from Christine Comans.
Donald always felt that a fateful occasion during his fresher year at St John's College at the University of Queensland, when he was dragooned into the chorus of Brian Nason's production of Gilbert and Sullivan's Patience, was the direction maker of his professional life. Hence, this poem. The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveller. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth, then took the other, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had warned them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet, knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less travelled by, and that has made all the difference.
Thank you, Christine. I think we all know that the difference that he made was not only for him. He made a difference in all of our lives, in so many lives, in so many ways. Don's friend and great colleague John O'Toole will now reflect on, in Don's words, my messy but much blessed working life, whose core I saw as a commitment to professionalising theatre skills and management in our community. John.
Christine couldn't even be seen. It's as plain as the nose on your face that Don Batchelor was a plain man. Except that the nose on your face isn't plain at all, as Don himself explained to Wesley Enoch in a famous lecture long ago, that Wesley still remembers vividly, as it seems do most of his fellow students, judging by the Facebook reminiscences. A plain man he was, plain as the nose on your face. There it is all the time. You know you can rely on it utterly. It's so quiet, sitting gently there in front of you, quite happy to get overlooked and go unnoticed, but necessary, and gives both savour and breath to our lives. I won't pursue this inelegant analogy further, because such a laboured metaphor will be making Don cringe by now. It's my revenge. And anyway, being as fastidious as he was plain, he didn't want fancy words. In his funerary instructions, which, as you can imagine and we've heard, were meticulous and detailed, he even avoided the grand word eulogy, preferring a few words. Though he did have a strong enough amour propre to ask me to pay tribute to his working life, which he himself accurately describes, as you've heard, as messy but much blessed. What a lovely phrase. One whose core was a commitment to professionalising theatre skills and management in our community. Plain is not ordinary, and much of this messy history is quite extraordinary. Similarly, though never ever pushy, he was no pushover. Only 3 weeks ago, he sent an officious cancer surgeon off with a flea in his ear, which was followed by an apology to Don from the hospital. Who in here would dare to do that, even in perfect health? In fact, we shouldn't be surprised, as I was, to hear that in his school days he was captain of football, as well as a champion sprinter, with those little legs. Not only that, he was the school ducks and the school captain. Not bad at the time for a working class scholarship kid at a respected private school. On to another scholarship, to the University of Queensland, where he discovered theatre, and it discovered him. Yet he also managed somehow to gain a creditable degree with his honours thesis, appropriately on the poet John Donne. That poet who actually reminds me a lot of Don himself, with his mixture of down-to-earth humour, sweet elegance, dead-sharp corkscrew wit, discomforting rigour of thought, and willingness to wrestle with the deep questions of human existence. But mainly at university he played and sang, as a member of Dramsoc and the Nascent College Players, which he co-founded with Brian Nason and an unusually talented group of student contemporaries, of a kind that just occasionally comes together at one time and coalesces. Gilbert and Sullivan in particular got a terrific hammering from this crowd, and Shakespeare, of course. Though technically these players were playing in their spare time, they were also professionalising their own theatre skills, as well as laying down the foundations of future professional theatre in Queensland. I deeply regret never having seen Don in full flight as an actor, but I can believe what I've heard, that as an actor he gave depth, meaning and passion to his roles, even, I'm told, to whimsical ones. I'm not quite sure what that must have looked like. After uni, he dutifully, but briefly, went to teach English at the New St Paul's School, Bald Hills, but just long enough, perhaps, to professionalise and hone some other skills, which would be quickly lost to the world of schools, but would in later years become what for some of us he is best remembered and most admired for, a great teacher. Now, if not earlier, another characteristic of Don started to manifest itself: his short attention span. No sooner launched on a career as a school teacher than he was off to Melbourne and then Sydney as a television producer and director in the education section of the ABC. He still managed to pop back to Queensland to take part in the first of the innovative railway tours that the College Players started up. Gilbert and Sullivan, of course. And Don strutting his stuff as a very modern Major General in HMS Pinafore. Just 3 years later, Brian and the uncertain prospect of professionalising Queensland theatre lured him back to help run the College Players as at least a pro-am venture. Salad Days was a triumph. The Last of Lambs, which he co-wrote with Brian, wasn't. Cinderella, which he also wrote, was. And with these two stalwarts together, the company was really off and running. Running right up to Cairns with The Merchant of Venice, the first show Donald directed for the company. And exactly how he directed it, we will see a glimpse of later on today in the second part of this tribute, down at the Queensland Theatre Company, an organisation, incidentally, which was founded that very year. 1969 was something of a watershed all round, as the players returned to stage the QTC's inaugural production, The Royal Hunt of the Sun, which Don Production managed. He then also briefly managed the SGI Theatre itself, SGIO. How could I forget that? SG10, I think we call it. As well as acting. And he got to shake the Queen's hand as, on a royal tour, she attended the second production, A Rum Do, a homegrown play which was a rum do indeed. He hung around long enough to star for the QTC in Philadelphia, Here I Come. Then it was Sydney, Here I Come, with Harry M. Miller. First to Sydney, then Melbourne, as the stage director of the Australian production of Hair, which, for younger listeners who don't know about it, was a musical that scandalised Australian conservatives, with a cast naked on stage, singing about drugs and sex and things previously off limits, or off stage anyway. Don would have quietly enjoyed stirring that pot. Next, back to Brisbane, as a freelance theatre director of the Brisbane premiere of Hibbard's White with Wire Wheels, and the dreadfully titled Who Cares? Before a relatively demure couple of years as senior tutor in the English department back at Queensland Uni, the first of his 3 universities' academic career. Again, Don learned quickly from the talented department round him, with Maggie Collins, Rob Jordan, poet Val Vallis, Alan Sykes, Ken Goodwin, Maureen Strugnell and others. He also had a short but brilliant stint as theatre reviewer for Theatre Australia, setting a new standard for the mainly woeful Brisbane critics scene of the time. 2 years of that were quite enough for Donald, so he embarked on one of those amazing overland to London trips that Australians did in those days to get his BTE, Been to Europe certificate. A flash forward here and a brief personal intrusion, if you'll forgive me. I heard about that trip in great detail 25 years later, during the most precious time that I ever spent with Donald. Robbie, Don and I, the 3 of us, were spending Christmas, of all places, in the Central Australian Aboriginal settlement of Ernabella. We'd gone there eagerly, at the invitation of our dear friend and very good person, Hilary Furlong, who ran the illustrious women's-only art centre there, famous for its silk batik, abstract patterns and craftwork. We thought we were going for a holiday and to meet the artists. But we found that they too had gone off on holiday. And Hilary unceremoniously put us, the 3 of us, to work, with Don and me dismantling cupboards, then scraping out these enormous cauldrons of wax, crusted on for days. To alleviate the drudgery, we invented a double-act comedy routine. We called ourselves Wax and Wayne. He was Wayne and I was Wax, and which kept us highly amused, though Robbie and Hilary didn't think we were that funny. We also spent many hours in conversation, where, for a change, mostly I listened while he talked. He was a wonderful spinner of yarns, and his blow-by-blow account of that trip to Europe with David Young all those years earlier, and of their fabled blow-up in Istanbul, made the scraping time pass wondrous quick. But enough's enough, and at Don's instigation, I swear, Hilary, On Christmas Eve, we finally revolted and went on strike for Christmas. And even Hillary wasn't game to point out to Don that we hadn't quite finished the cauldrons. Back to 1976. When Don finally came back from England, he revealed another of his real talents as a picker-up and rescuer of lame ducks. He was to spend the whole of the next decade doing this for a succession of ailing institutions. The first of them was the only recently formed Queensland Theatre Orchestra, originally founded to provide orchestral backing for ballet and theatre. But under the inspired leadership of the admired and eccentric Georg Tintner, the orchestra had ambitions greater than its financial capacity and struggled to survive as a second orchestra in the Queensland of the time. Don became its administrator and in 3 years steered it back towards solvency and towards a bright, if brief, future as the Queensland Philharmonic. Next came a harder nut to crack and a lamer duck to rescue. A couple of years earlier, Paul Pay, head of drama at Kelvin Grove College of Advanced Education, later Brisbane CAE, and then QUT, had the bright idea of setting up an acting course. Not quite the NIDA of the North yet, but a mainly part-time associate diploma course for locals. At the time, you may recall, Queensland still had some vestiges of cultural cringe in academic as well as artistic circles. So the college went for a course director from overseas, another eccentric. Polish director Bogdan Trukan had a stellar CV of working with all the greats, from Grotowski to most of the top theatres and opera houses of Europe. Had Kelvin Grove looked more closely at that CV, though, they would have seen that he'd only ever worked in any of them once. Within a year, he had turned the course into a kind of secret, intense laboratory, with students locked away for 9-hour sessions and an atmosphere of mysticism and mystery. Some students were captivated, others repulsed. Virtually no public eye was allowed to see any results, far too precious. And in 2 years, the course was a shambles, and Trukan either shook the unworthy dust of Queensland from his shoes or was sacked, depending on who you talked to. With half the students picketing the director's office, the other half counter-protesting and celebrating his departure. Most institutions would have cut their losses and the course itself. However, who else was on hand but the serial rescuer, Don Batchelor, to take on a job that nobody else would have dreamt of, and working with that ineffable unflappability, patiently picked up the pieces, working collaboratively, picked up the students in some cases too, laid the modest groundwork for what was to become the QUT acting course, and later on the groundbreaking open degree. Meanwhile, in the world of the professional theatre he'd worked so hard to create, Twelfth Night was having artistic success, but its own financial and management troubles, which resulted in it losing its theatre building and its name, with a defiant name change to TN exclamation mark. In 3 years as TN's administrator, with Brian, then Rod Whistler as artistic directors, and of course Robbie and Jennifer Watson at their side, he piloted it back to what got David Rowbottom's slightly grudging verdict as, at its best, the finest professional theatre ensemble in town. And Verity Masters in the Australian verily gushed about it. When it comes to style, No one can beat Brisbane's TN Company. They're absolutely dripping with it. And we know Don was a great one for style. Those words confirmed that Don had now fully achieved his commitment to professionalising theatre skills and management in this community. Over the next few years, he still made occasional ventures into the theatre world, such as his memorable 1995 celebration 50 years on from the end of the Second World War, cutting a rug in the City Hall, together with Robbie Nason, the old firm together again. But back in 1985, with the job done, and with that notorious attention span, he turned to something entirely different. In a fit of entrepreneurial zeal, he opened a cleaning business and found himself charring for the likes of Philip Bacon. At the same time, another academic lame duck attracted him waddling past, and he rescued the Creative Arts Diploma at Brisbane CAE, at first on a part-time basis. Then he and it morphed into part of a new leisure management degree. In the process, he spread himself from Mount Gravatt to Castledine, where, with his legendary persuasiveness, he inveigled me into lecturing on the history of recreation, a subject I knew nothing whatever about. So I just talked about play. Don and the students didn't seem to mind. However, this very slight acquaintanceship with that course made me realise one thing: how his students revered and adored him. Bored again, by 1990 it was off to a new challenge at Kelvin Grove to found the Arts Management programme at what shortly became QUT. They at least managed to nail him to the spot at last, and he stayed there until retirement in 2002. For most of us, a premature retirement, because only 3 years earlier he had, for the second year in a row, won the title of Best Lecturer on Campus and an Australian government commendation as an outstanding teacher, capital O, capital T. That's something none of his students would dispute, as I can verify personally this time, since I became one of them only 2 years ago, as he coached me in acting skills for a daunting international in-role keynote I had to deliver. And it was largely due to Don managing almost to make a silk purse of a sow's ear that I didn't make a fool of myself, and the performance was a success, like most of Donald's. Throughout all these years and decades, he was also giving himself to the arts in other ways, from being a founding board member in 1973 of the Queensland Festival of the Arts, then Warana, the Australian Council Community Arts Committee, Queensland Community Arts Network, and PlayLab. In 1999, he won a richly deserved Lord Mayor's Award for services to the arts. Since retiring, he made a massive hit in China, teaching something else entirely, something new for a change, English language. In recent years, he's taken a number of other performance amateurs like me, professionalising them into skilled performers, one of whom you'll see in the second part of this tribute at the QTC later on. He saw his achievement mainly in the theatre world. I marvel at his accomplishment as a teacher and educator, and as someone who effortlessly bridged those two worlds, often suspicious of each other. I'll finish where I began, because I can find no words half as good to finish with as the goodbye to Don, written by one of his own most distinguished students, who, in his own life, effortlessly brings the worlds of education and theatre together, Wesley Enoch, on Facebook last week. Thank you, Don, for all you taught me about myself and the human condition, about seeing the world for what it is, and to use my creativity to create worlds that celebrated the lateral, the artistic, and the communal. Your lessons live on in all those students you helped mould, the shows you created, the companies you helped birth and run, the friends, the people you accidentally offended, those you intentionally offended, the receivers of your cheeky humour, the beneficiaries of your guidance, and the people you showed your love to. Thank you, bless and release.
For those of you who don't know me or haven't seen me for such a long time, I'm Graham Bruce. And my friendship with Don began when he arrived at St John's College way back in 1958. It was there that the College Players was founded, as John has spoken about, by Brian Mason, a company which profoundly influenced Don and myself. We shared the role of Aragon in that play, you know. Both Don, myself, and many others were influenced by that foundation of the College Players. This poem from Don. The tide rises, the tide falls, the twilight darkens, the curlew calls. Along the sea sands, damp and brown, the traveller hastens towards the town, and the tide rises and the tide falls. The morning breaks, the steeds in their stalls stamp and neigh as the hostler calls. The day returns, but never more returns the traveller to the shore, and the tide rises, the tide falls. That chosen by Donald, but this one from me, to thank Donald for 56 years of wonderful close friendship. When to the sessions of sweet silent thought I summon up remembrance of things past, I sigh the lack of many a thing I sought. With old woes, new wail my dear time's waste. Then can I drown an eye unused to flow, for precious friends hid in death's dateless night, and weep afresh love's long since cancelled woe, and moan the expense of many a vanished sight. Then can I grieve at grievances foregone, and heavily from woe to woe tell o'er the sad accounts of fall bemoaned moan, which I knew pay as if not paid before. But if the while I think on thee, dear friend, all losses are restored and sorrows end. Thank you, Donald, for 56 years of wonderful friendship.
Thank you, Grady. Journey is a big theme for Don. As he made the journey outwards into life, into career, into the world, the home base, which always seemed to be such an important anchor point and to figure always in his thinking, was the family life and love he shared with his brother Ron, with Jenny, their children, and the wider brood. Ron says he followed lovingly in Don's footsteps as his big brother opened doors constantly and shared his wisdom through ongoing mentoring. Sounds pretty familiar. Ron, please tell us some more. I was driving along
one day, and my phone made a little noise it makes when you get a message. So I pulled over to the side of the road, and I read it, and it was from Don. Only just last year. The message read something like this: little brother, I won't be able to push you in the pram up to the powerhouse and back anymore. It was the day that he first heard about kids. And so I eventually drove on a course, and this is going to be very hard for me. So with that haunting thing in my mind, now and now, I start the story of Don back from our early days in a little town called Charlton, approximately 600 kilometres west, direct west from Brisbane. I think at 7 or 8 years, Don was probably pushing me in that pram. He's 5 years older than me. I distinctly remember that pram because, believe it or not, at funny old Charleville, the pathway had been made from, I think some Italian artisans must have wandered off the pathway and been given a concreting job, and they made these strange markings in the concrete, and the clack, 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 clack of the noises was always something that I suppose lulled me off. And Charleville for us was it was hard in some ways. I was born out of wedlock. That's why my name's Watson. My mother married to give me a father. That didn't work out either. But it didn't make any difference ever to John or to the other brother Gary in all our lives. And so the happy times we had there were mainly just in the Warrego, and me riding horses and Don running away because he didn't want to get on behind me. However, they still were wonderful times. We lived in a hotel called the Cattle Keg. It was really called the Rivette Hotel because one of the men, part owners in it, had won a lot of money on the racehorse Rivette when he won the Melbourne Cup. The other man was a guy called Rossi, Clive Ross. He was a member of the Light Horse at some stage and very magnificent, with plumes from his cap. And he virtually became like a father to me. Wonderful to me. He sent me down to the safe to get money for the bar and take it up, bundles of notes. Nothing ever happened at that place in the hotel. It was out of hand. I slept with shearers and drovers, and Don sometimes was in a room with whoever came in at the time. When the house was full, we went to our mother's room. We only had one room. There was one dresser with a little low piece for mum's combs and things, and there was one of those tall bits beside it where you could hang clothing. I never had anything that you could hang. My things went into the top and the smallest drawer. So it was pretty tough, but it was good. We loved it. We were fed well, and the people in the hotel just took us under their arms. His best friends were a couple of guys called David and Robert Vickers. They were the sons of Mr. Vickers, who was the flying doctor at Charleville at the time. They were Don's friends. They didn't like me coming over there to play at the house. They had wonderful dinky toys, which I used to surreptitiously hide away somewhere and slip them up a drain pipe at the hotel. At one stage I went back years later and put my hand up that drain pipe and 14 dinky toys. spite of being the lead, I think, at the time, they looked pretty rusty in there. However, they were still wonderful to me as well. And Don's life changed because the Vickers boys had the opportunity to go away to Slade and Warwick. That was before 1951, and Don then went to Slade after approaching Mum, and she very worriedly approached the Church of England at Charleville, and he was allowed to go. He was a brilliant student there at Charleville even at the time. A certain person, whose nickname was Whale's Teeth, confronted him one day as we came out of Marnie's store with 2 spare ribs, one in each hand. You used to get them free in those days once they'd skinned the meat off the bone. This person virtually assaulted Don, pushed him up against the fence and told him he was not to ever beat her in class again and get better marks than he. I dropped my pork chop. I looked up at this gargantuan. I said, "Don't you dare speak to my brother like that. I'll knock your whale's teeth right down your throat. Where they come out, I don't care." So, on the Monday, I went to school and I got the cuts, 6 of the best across the backside. She was a horrible person. A lot of his compatriots were like that in the classroom. However, anyway, Don went off to Slade in 1951, and I was devastated when he went. And I had a silly little thing I used to do. When he went, I got 2 shilling piece, and I used to go down into the stables, the tack room, and I used to put it on top of a little post where one of the saddles sat out. When he came back the next holiday, I'd race down to get that 2 shillings, and we'd go straight up to Henville's store and have 2 malted milks. In those days, you could go to the pictures, I think, for 2 and 6pence. You could buy your tickets and get a pie and drink at interval. So it was pretty good in those. I don't know why we don't do it like that. Where am I going next? 1954, I went to Slade. I came into the kitchen one night from somebody from the bursar was there from Slade, and she uttered, as soon as she saw this little gremlin come in, "Why should one have so much whilst the other has so little?" So they took me to Slade, but they only promised to try me in the 3rd term, because Rossi, who was virtually a father to me, said, "He'll never stay. He'll never stay. He'll be back on the next train." He made a lot of bets that I'd be back, and he lost it all. However, I love Slade, and as John mentioned a bit earlier on, I probably rode along a little bit in the shadow of Don, and some doors opened for me, and he did well there, and so did I. Before I went, I never had a pair of shoes. In 1954, I was 43, when I was 11. I had sandals, I never had a pair of shoes, and I couldn't do up laces. So Don taught me. And after 3 weeks, I got it. So I was able to eventually wear shoes at Slade. His time at Slade was wonderful. He's good at everything except cricket. He hated that bloody red ball. You'd think he would have been a good swimmer, but he was no good. We took him swimming once up the where was it? Up in Whitsunday. And he had one of those things that glowed. Well, every time he came up out of the water, Don said, quick, save him, save him. Every time he did. Couldn't handle it and all, so he just stayed and padded around. So that was another thing about him. We did have some very, very wonderful holidays with him. All through. He was wonderful. Jennifer and I and Don had some laughs in Australia as well as overseas. There was another little thing I wanted to show. Oh, when he was at Slade, the football. He was a fantastic footballer. He was in the mould, I'm telling you, and I'm telling you the truth, he was in the mould of Darren Lockwood. He's such a good brain. He had it all planned out before half time. It was all done and dusted by half time. The team he played in for 3 years and he was captain of, every season, at the end of the season, a big team photograph, and the scores at the bottom. 304 to 6 against. 328, 2 against. Went like that for 3 years. It was a 7 stone 70. The guy that coached them, Rusty Marshall, he was like Wayne Bent. Anyway, Don used to, when I was at Slade, the guy that coached Don said, Ronnie, you're not going to be like Don, are you, when you play football? I said, why? He said, well, on a wet day, Don was no good at all. I said, why? He said, as soon as he got mud on his shorts, he spent half an hour trying to get So, I went away. Don was at uni, and I went to Teachers College, and Don was last of lands with Brian and all that sort of stuff, and was meeting all these wonderful theatrical people all the time, sitting down in the garage at the back of the house. They really didn't want for much, and actors are always poor anyway, so it was their lot. In Charleville, not in Charleville, in Brighton, where we went to live, Mum's house was destroyed in a storm. Luckily for us, Mum had just died previously. Don had been a wonderful son. Just, he adored it. She did everything well for us. And I never bothered about anything about my so-called father, because I always said to people, my mother did everything for me. I don't want to worry about anybody else. And that's how it was. Anyway, this house was destroyed. He was down at our house, Brighton, and the insurance agent had to come in one night to talk about the claim. And Don had been at the house when it happened. He was hiding under the table, bloody tiles coming through the ceiling and through the dining room table, and only Don would do it. He went and filled a bloody bathtub with water in case it was a national catastrophe. They wouldn't be able to drink again. And so this guy came in with his little notes and read them out and told us all about it. And he said, I don't think we can do much about this claim because the water damage is what caused the damage, and the water shouldn't have been able to get in. And so I'm very sorry, but there's not much that I can help you with. And Don went, I refute that! With that, this poor little bugger had 14 full A4 pieces of paper were flying through the air, and he went straight over the bar, signed the papers and said, have a nice evening. You think Don was a lot tougher than what you did. And we were, of course, to find that out later on. So, a little street, I'm jumping around here now, I know, but a little street at Kelvin Grove, just down from the college, we then went to Ashgrove, where Don lived in shoebox conditions. It was the tiniest room. With all that he had in it, there was never a thing out of place. My daughter Angela eventually lived in that room. When Angela lived in it, you could hardly push the door up. But she did too sometimes. Benjamin also was in that house, that same room as well. So those times then at Ashgrove Avenue, and they still are now, they were halcyon days for all of us. We had a wonderful relationship. When you think we went there back in 1983, we bought the house. I'd gone with Don to a little street because we wanted to get up closer to the city. He said, "Oh, well, I've got a house there." I said, "Yeah, but you live there." He said, "No, I rent that. I've got a little unit attached to it." So I went there, checked it out. It was full of bikies. 20 of them or so lying around the floor with tattoos everywhere and bikes under the house. And not a sound out of them ever. I don't know what he did. But he asked him to move and they were gone. No trouble at all. So we moved there. It was good there, but then the house became too small with our children. So we went to Ashgrove and started doing things there. Big Ford GTHR at one stage underneath the house, but now that's all a unit down below, and Don and Mum and I were responsible for all those extensions, and then out the back, looks up over the park up to Bank Street. It's a wonderful place, and we had wonderful times there. I always wanted to have a video machine up on the corner because some of the things that Don and Mum got up to, things they say, it was terrible. She goes so far, Don goes 10 steps further, and then Mum goes on even a little bit further. All of this time, Don referred to Jennifer as Mum, he called me Dad. One dickhead one day said, "Your son there..." I can wear that. So there were plenty of red wine, whites, and beers, and various concoctions. And I was in the state one time with the trucks, and I came back very, very tired. I was sleeping it off, and got a phone call. "Dad." "Yes?" "Can you come to the custom house?" "What?" "Could you come to the custom house, please?" Trying to enunciate very, very clearly. "Could you please come to the customs house?" "Why?" "We can't drive." I get there. There they are, Don with arm akimbo, Jen. They're hanging off 2 stools beside a bar, about to fall off the perch. I joined them, and we all ended up getting plastered and gone. I've got to try and finish this up. I must say to you that in all of this, the relationship with my wife and my brother, and my children with my brother, it's something very, very hard to explain. Nobody has a relationship that long as we did, without a couple of hiccups. Twice he left and went and lived in another little unit, and we kept going, "You don't belong there, come back home, come back, you're back here." So, well, that was, in the scheme of things, that was nothing. So, until the present day, he's been with us all the way. And he accorded them every civility possible. There's a little story there, but I don't think I'll go down there. It's taking too long now. Like you get up from from a table at a restaurant, and we go to pay. Mum and I and the kids, Don, money on the table, fall on the floor, he'd start to walk around. Jennifer say, Don, there's money here. Yes, towards the bill. No, that's too much. It's all right. And that happened. So that's the way he was. I remember once at a bank manager said to me, you know your brother owes you a lot of money. I said, does he now? He said, yes. He said, when are you going to get it? I said, well, he hasn't said anything to me about it. So it must mean he still needs it. So I said, you're not going to do anything? No. I've never met anyone like you people. Don and Batchelor and what. Anyway, once again, that's the way he was. I'd love him for it. Now, suddenly, all of this, a bleak cloud blew across and it was cancer. And that was the beginning of the end of things, because we couldn't go out anymore with him very often. We were worried about getting away all the time because he was so in his little unit. We had to get back. And my wife Jennifer, I just cannot say how much she did for Don, much more than me. She's so good medically, and a lot of times Don would go to a doctor and Jen would say to him, oh, it'll be this and this and this and this, and I'll give you this. He came back and he said, guess what? The doctor said it was this and this and this and this, and this is the medicine Jennifer recommended in the first place. So that's the way it was. So he's lucky to have her. And so this thing that struck him last week, Wednesday morning, he always used to toddle up. No matter how sick he was, he'd showered, he was dressed, he was presentable. He'd come up for breakfast, he'd come in through the door, someone would say, what do you want, darling? He'd say, egg. He'd say, all the cat. But on this day, on the 15th, I'd say it was, Wednesday, last week, I was making the tea and I heard Jennifer's mournful cry, oh darling, what's wrong? And I knew straight away it was quite serious. So we took him up. Well, Mum couldn't take him, she had to go take the kids to the grandkids. And so I took him to the hospital and we went in and they said they'd do testing. Because he had the night before, he'd had 4 lots of morphine, liquid morphine. He wouldn't take medication. He didn't like taking medication. He should have taken it. We had a Truckee CB radio there that had a radius of 14 kilometres. All he had to do was click the squelcher without having to talk, and we would have been there. But he didn't do that. So I took him up, and he went on to the morphine, and he told the specialist, now I'm going to Stanthorpe on the weekend. You have to go. I'm going. All right. Well, I'll see what little sort of jungle juice I can get you, spark you up with, and get you there. So away he went, and he did give me a little look, and I knew that it wasn't going to be great. And away he went, and that day, got through the day off and on sleeping. Jen and luckily Benny came, and we were all able to say good night to him, goodbye, we'll see you in the morning. Shook my hand, Benny gave him a big kiss, and Mum kissed him. The best thing, the very best thing was his brain was still functioning the way he would have wanted it always. He was terrified of losing that. He lost his manipulation on bloody iPads and things like that. So I can honestly say that next morning I went there, Mum and I went there, and he was in the last throes. The girls went down because the young girls won the guitar. So I stayed with him till his last little. And so then I thought of Prospero's thing, and I didn't want to go right through it. I was too miserable to learn it off by heart. But it was like a Prospero send-off, really. We are such stuff as dreams are made of, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. It's exactly what happened to Don. It's Shakespeare all the way, it's theatre all the way. It's the best thing for him. The other alternative would have been horrible to linger on. So that was it. My beautiful daughter has written a poem, and I thought if I get through my thing, Angela's poem will probably knock me out altogether. It hasn't been that long, really, since you've gone away. Some days seem to just pass by while others are filled with pain. The air is somehow alone. I wish just simply for a touch. A way to let you know. It seems this life's just inside out, and often back to front. It seems time just passes by, not ever being enough. I love you now, I always will. Wishes I might to hold you still. But one day maybe, not too long, will you be standing before me, ever strong. Thank you.
This furniture defeats me. I wanted to say, well done that man. Don's given me a terrifying thing to read. But before I do, I was reminded while Ron was speaking about Don's real estate efforts. Because at one stage I was put in charge of letting one of his houses. He was overseas. And I was so terrified by the responsibility that apparently I threw out all sorts of worthy people. They're probably still in therapy. And I let it to a group who kept saying to Don over the years, because they stayed there for a long time, where's that scary friend of yours? I suppose I did him a service, but he did me no service. He has asked me to read a thing called On Accepting Death. In our human case, we cling to the precious consciousness that seems to set us apart from the rest of the natural world. And we see death with different eyes. To experience loss and to grieve it are the common experiences. And to deny them would be to make ourselves less human. However, the pain of our personal loss is ours. Within the greater whole, nothing is lost. Perhaps it is too much to say that we will ever understand death, but the fruit of time and pain and healing is that we will come to accept it. Now, before I vacate this post, I've received a couple of messages. Now, we've all had messages, but I thought this one was worth sharing with you because it captures so much of what we've been remembering today. It comes from Jane Hyde. Some of you will remember Jane. And she sent it to my husband and me, and she says, "My condolences on the loss of such a dear friend to you both. I remember Don as one of the angels. a man of inimitable, bright-eyed, smiling goodness. It was as if a light shone within him. My thoughts are also with those I remember fondly from our young days. Robbie, Ellie, Brian, Graham, who have known and loved Don for as long and as well as yourselves. And then there was a message from another Jane, my great friend Jane Sanderson. She's now Jane Graham, living in London. I've just been staying with her. And she sent a message saying, because she hasn't seen Don for some years, and she said, "Oh, I'm so glad you're home. I'm so glad you got to spend some time with Don." She said, "I remember his laugh. I remember what a fantastic godfather he was to Charlotte, my daughter, who's here today. I remember him singing Willow Tit Willow in the Mikado. And it reminded me of the wonderful moments, and I'm going to offer you a challenge in a moment. But my memory is of, well, there are many memories, but I thought to myself, some of the quirky words that Don thought up. My personal favourite is 11-3. It's sort of become a useful thing. I've got 11-3 things to do. And then there was another one that's gone into our folklore. And it happened actually, John was talking before about Don's trip through from the east. And we met him at the other end in Cambridge. We were there in Cambridge. And he arrived having, I think, flown out of India as Pakistan flew in. And he looked appalling. He had hair that sort of met this terrible coat that he had on. We met him at the train in Cambridge. We were supposed to meet our friend Barbie MacArthur there one day, Barbie Quayle, talking of people who turn up at the wrong time, but she sent a message saying sorry she got on the wrong train and she was in Rugby. But Don did turn up, looking appalling. This coat was so evil smelling, it still had meat attached to it. And it was a wet day, and he was yelling about how he didn't want, well actually I cannot use the words, I refrain from using the words that he used. I will actually borrow some of his own words that he used in connection with another great friend of ours who died, James Warner. And Don wrote a thing about James, in which James, who was a Christian priest, had done something or other, and Don said this was not the action of an entirely blameless person. Well, the language that Don used that day was not that of an entirely blameless person either, because he was yelling about how he didn't want to go into another religious establishment, except he used fruitier terms. And we forced him into our car and said, well, too bad, we're going to Ely. You cannot come to this part of the world without seeing Ely Cathedral. And he whinged and he whined and we stuck him in the car and we drove implacably towards Ely. And the day got wetter and the coat got smellier. And he whinged and whined and we kept talking about the glories of Ely. I think I might have even mentioned Hereward the Wake and Cromwell, but never mind. And as we got closer, out of the mists and the fens, Ely rose up. But the rain kept coming down. We couldn't find a park. And Don came out with the ageless expression, which has gone into our folklore. Isn't it amazing how much you can see from the car? I still get postcards. I still get postcards, and on people have written, it was one of those days where it was amazing how much you could see. That's what he gave us. And I offer this challenge to you to say, later on we'll exchange memories like that, of days when, of things that he's given us. I only have one last image to leave with you. If there's a heaven, standing at the gates and opening them will be Johnny and Don for Gough to walk through.
Now, there's a final message from Donald, the Joyce Grenfell piece that you have in your programs. Now that I'm gone before the rest of you, break not a flower nor inscribe a stone, nor when I'm gone speak in a Sunday voice, but be the usual selves that I have known. Weep if you must, parting is hell, but life goes on, so sing as well.
So as you've heard, Donald chose everything today, so he chose this song, and luckily I've got the words here because they're on the back of your program. But I built there was a secret chord, David played and pleased the Lord, but you don't really care. It goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall, and the major lift. The Papa King composing hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Your faith was strong, but you needed proof. You saw her bathing on the roof, her beauty in the moonlight overthrew. You consoled through the kitchen chair. She broke your throne and she cut your hair, and from your lips she drew the hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Baby, I've been here before. I know this room and I've walked this floor. I used to live alone before I knew. And I've seen your flag on the marble arch, and love is not a victory march. It's a cold and it's a broken hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Let me know what's really going on below. Now you never show to me today. And remember when I moved in you, the holy dawn was moving too, and every breath we drew was hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah.
my dear, well, really, what's it to you? Little blaze of light in every word. Doesn't matter which you've heard, the holy or the broken. Hallelujah. I did my best, it wasn't much, I couldn't feel, so I tried to touch. I told the truth, I didn't come to fool you. And even when all went wrong, I stand before the Lord of song with nothing on my tongue but hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Thank you so much, Mickey. I think I heard him up there singing. And long may he sing in our hearts. So, friends, that's it. And as usual, this Donald Batchelor production leaves us with a bit to think about. I wish I could call him to the stage, but I do think a round of applause for the author. Here we are, everybody, ready for part 2 of the grand tribute to Don. Welcome back for those who have been able to be with us for part 1, and welcome also for those who weren't able to be there but are here now. So this is going to be maybe 20 minutes. We're going to start with a short selection from what proved to be Don's final production. It was called Piaf from the Heart. Now, Don devised this show for and with Margie Rowe, who's here with us today. And let me tell you, it was down to the exceptional voice that she has that Don said, okay, I'll be part of this. And some of us were lucky enough to see an outing of the show last year at Don's 75th birthday. So I'll just pass straight over to Margie. You might want to tell us a little bit about the show, Margie, and please sing for us. Welcome.
So I was lucky enough to be able to sing for Don for his birthday last year. And it was amazing, the introduction that he gave. It was so Don. It was like, well, my sister-in-law said, what are you doing for your 75th birthday? And I said, well, I don't know, really. And then he remembered that I owed him a lot of favours. Don was always so generous. But his introduction was this. Well, when I realised I needed to have a birthday party, I thought I'd just get this woman down to sing for you, and she'll sing a pile of songs, and then you can have a drink at the bar, and then she'll sing another pile of songs, and then you can all go home. So we won't do a pile of songs, but Don requested that I sing a song in particular for him, which I will. And I'd also like to sing a song that always resonates so strongly with me for Don. And I get you warmed up with the Piaf song that you probably know very, very well. Des yeux qui font baisser le mien, un rire qui se perd sous ma bouche. Voilà le portrait sans retouche de l'homme auquel j'appartiens. Quand il me prend dans ses bras et me parle tout bas, je vois la vie en rose. Il me dit des mots d'amour, des mots de tous les jours, et ça me fait quelque chose. Il est entré dans mon cœur une part de bonheur dont je connais la cause. C'est lui pour moi pour lui dans la vie. Elle me l'a dit, la jurée pour la vie. Dès que je l'aperçois, alors je sens en moi mon cœur qui bat. Et lui d'un moi mourir, un grand bonheur qui prend sa place. Les ennuis, les chagrins s'effacent. Pour mon plaisir. Quand il me prend dans ses bras et me parle tout bas, je vois la vie en rose. Il me dit des mots d'amour, des mots de tous les jours, et ça me fait quelque chose. Il est entré dans mon cœur une part de bonheur dont je connais la cause. C'est toi pour moi pour toi dans la vie. Elle me l'a dit, la jurée pour la vie. Dès que je l'aperçois, alors je sens en moi mon cœur qui bat. La vie en rose. This next song is a song that Edith Piaf wrote with her dear friend Marguerite Monod after the death of the love of her life, Marcel Sedon. And I have to pinch a tiny bit of the script and morph the words a little bit to say that this afternoon the show goes on, and this afternoon I am singing this for Don Batchelor. L'hymne à l'amour, hymn to love. ciel bleu ce ne part s'effondrer et la terre va bien s'écrouler. Pas m'importe si tu m'aimes, je me fous du monde entier. Tant que l'amour inondera mes matins, tant que mon cou frémira sous tes mains, pas m'importe les problèmes, mon amour, puisque tu m'aimes. J'irai jusqu'au bout du monde, je me ferai tellement blonde si tu me le demandais. J'aurais décroché la lune, j'aurais volé la fortune si tu me le demandais. Je rendrai ma patrie, je rendrai mes amis si tu me le demandais. On parle bien de moi, je ferai n'importe quoi, je ferai n'importe quoi si tu me le demandais. Si un jour la vie t'arrache à moi, si tu meurs, que tu sois loin de moi, pas m'importe si tu m'aimes, car moi je mourrai aussi. Nous aurons pour nous l'éternité dans le bleu de toute l'immensité, dans le ciel de deux problèmes. Mon amour, crois-tu qu'on s'aime? Dieu réunit ceux qui And now I shall have the pleasure of singing the song that Don requested me to sing. Non, je ne regrette rien. No, I regret nothing. Michel Volcker et Charles Dumont, non, je ne regrette rien. Non, rien de rien. Non, je ne regrette rien. Le bien qu'on m'a fait, ni le mal, tout ça m'est bien égal. Non, rien de rien. Non, je ne regrette rien. C'est payé J'ai allumé le feu, mes chagrins, mes plaisirs. Je n'ai plus besoin de balayer mes amours avec le tremolo, balayer pour toujours. Je repars à zéro.
I'm sure Don would have loved it, and plenty of time in there for us to reflect as well. So we're going to take a little step back in time now from Don's last production to his first big show, the 1969 College Players' Merchant of Venice. It was a milestone production in many ways for many people who are involved in the big tour of the state has already been mentioned. There was a national tour as well, which took all of us down to Canberra for a couple of performances at the new theatre centre there. Very fortunately, the show and the tour were the subject of a documentary film, Shakespeare on Wheels, by Brian Whitty. Now, some of you may have seen bits of it over the years, but we've got, and I hope it's all queued up, we have a snippet featuring Don talking about his directorial intent.
The College Players is the brainchild of Brian Nason. However, this was their first production that he did not personally direct. The artistic director of The Merchant of Venice was 30-year-old Don Batchelor, who's been with the College Players since its inception. He's also worked in television and radio for the Australian Broadcasting Commission.
There's quite a responsibility in producing Shakespeare for school audiences. It is fashionable among a number of producers to impose an outside and very personal view of the play. But I felt it was important, if the audience was to understand the play as it's written, to allow Shakespeare to speak for himself. One of the problems with The Merchant of Venice is the two levels on which the play works. It's not just the light romantic comedy that surface appearances would deceive us into believing. It has something essential to say about human beings and the human condition. And for the reasonable projection of this aspect of the play, the actor playing Shylock's got a very important responsibility. He must not be caricatured, he can't be burlesqued as a typical villain. I was fortunate to have an actor with the wide experience of Reg Cameron in the role. It is important to understand each of the players and their personal involvement with the character they're going to portray. I believe that it is only by doing this that one can come to create a fully rounded ensemble performance of any play.
What a kid, eh? What a kid. Time has certainly marched on for all of us, unfortunately. But I'm sure that you would recognise that kind of thoughtful, clear-sighted approach as an intrinsic part of the creativity of Don that we all know. That concern for and delight in words, the love of music, the sense of style and purpose were the abiding hallmarks of his talent. And that sounds like the beginning of a toast. We haven't done it yet, and I hope that we're all giddy enough. Okay, I think it looks to me as though just about everyone's got a glass in their hand. If you haven't, please mind. So, I'm not sure that there's too many more words to add to what's already been spoken about Don, so I'm not going to attempt to do that. But I would like to propose a toast to a great man, to a life very well lived. Here's to you, Donald Batchelor. We love you and miss you. To Don.
Very well. See you again.
And farewell to you, dear Don. I just wanted to ask everyone to say thank you finally once more to Margie for that lovely set of stage. We'd also like to thank the Queensland Theatre Company for the venue, for the help, Wesley, Catherine, Julian, Scott and Deirdre in particular. Thank you to Greg Gesh for the visuals. Thank you one and all for being here. Cheers.